Are you stuck staring at your W-2? Are tax refund worries holding you back? You probably have FOMO, the fear of messing up. The fix? Using TurboTax on Intuit Credit Karma. They find every credit and deduction to help you get every refund dollar you deserve, or your money back. It's time to overcome your fear of messing up and get your taxes done right. Start filing today in the Credit Karma app.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi!
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Good morning. This is Mike Stoller for the Stoller Real Estate Report. What's happening with the investment sales? What's happening at the end of 2025 and the outlook for 2026? I'm lucky today. I have my friend David Schechtman, who is the Senior Executive Managing Director at Meridian Capital Group and Meridian Investment Sales. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Michael. Always a pleasure.
So, you sell buildings and land. How was the end of 2025?
Well, the end of 2025 was certainly better than the beginning of 2025. Commercial real estate brokers by nature have to be optimistic and certainly opportunistic, but the numbers don't lie at the end of a year. We were definitely on an upward trajectory, and knock wood, that's continued through what is 2/3 of the way through Q1 of 2026.
So how, at the beginning of the year, how do you look at the market?
I think the market's great. I think that there's some paradigm shifts overall. And when we define the market, my relevance is selling any and all asset types, generally from 10 million to about 150 million. After that, I become a little less relevant, but that's where we have significant market share. And I will tell you the paradigm shift is twofold. One, it's pricing. Pricing started to change in 2019 for the residential arena. That was forced by draconian leftist misguided legislation, and that continued to affect values. And then the credit crunch, really, of 2022, 2023. So all asset classes, prices just had to come down. And they finally have. The second paradigm shift has been who is buying. Gone are the days when you can get engaged for a well-priced property and just make 20 or 30 phone calls and define the market. A lot of the usual suspects took their equity out of New York and went to really exotic places like the other 49 states. We have a lot of foreign buyers in New York. And by foreign, I mean people from other exotic places like Chicago, Toronto, and certainly international. So we've got reset pricing. We've got a whole new pool of buyers, and notwithstanding what's happening in City Hall and in Albany, the volume doesn't lie. Deals are happening.
So since you bring up City Hall and Albany, what do you see?
Well, City Hall, I think, is one of the biggest bogeys that both sellers, buyers, and really anybody who's in real estate, it keeps us up at night. I'm going to leave my extremely conservative, right-leaning politics to the side and just talk about numbers and finance. I don't think, by definition, when you have a legislative body in City Hall that appoints a head of housing czar, Sia Weaver, who specifically and directly, and I quote, admits that private people shouldn't own real estate, end quote, that's going to be a cause for concern. But notwithstanding their unbelievably thinly veiled showmanship by holding seminars and conferences, one was dubbed the worst landlord. They are constantly demonizing commercial real estate owners, but fortunately, New York is a resilient city, and people recognize that at some point the tomfoolery and leftist blather will eventually go away, and finance and commerce will prevail.
Okay. When you say they will prevail, what do you believe about this potential tax hike?
I think that the tax hike is like all other tax hikes and like all other, legislation, whether it's a, state, local, or even on the federal level, where you have movie stars threatening to leave the country if Trump comes in. and fairly well-off people threatening to leave certain locales when taxes get raised. A large part of the people have no choice but to grin and bear it. Their businesses, their families, their communities are tied to here in New York, and people with the financial wherewithal may just have to be crass, suck it up. But I do think you're now getting to a point where there are many other options. Gone are the days where we all work 5+ days a week in the office. Now, we've definitely retreated from this kind of remote and hybrid. I think across the board, the numbers don't lie. More often than not, people are in the office. But offices have moved. Suburban office is a logical choice for people who are saying, if I could just move 10 minutes away from the island of Manhattan, I'm going to save some corporate tax. I think it is taking a gun and putting it to the temple of commerce.
Okay, with regard to that, you've been doing a number of deals in New Jersey. What do you attribute these deals in Paramus, Islin, and some other neighborhoods of New Jersey?
Sure. We're actually in the market with a handful of suburban office offerings in New Jersey. And it's funny, if you would have asked me 15 years ago my thoughts on New Jersey commercial real estate, I would tell you the only commercial real estate I see in New Jersey is from the I-95 corridor as I'm driving through it. I would say about 25% of my business now is in New Jersey, and I am very bullish on it, not just because I'm closing the deals, because the deals make economic sense. We closed a $23 million sale of a beautiful office building in Ramsey, New Jersey in Q4 of last year. 100% occupied, magnificent building, and the cash-on-cash returns were close to 10%. With a very strong occupancy and probably a wait list for more occupancy. When you compare that to some of the antiquated office stock in New York City that's having trouble leasing up and being financially viable, why not go to the suburbs? Sometimes it takes me 45 minutes to get from the Upper East Side of Manhattan to the financial district. In 45 minutes, you can leave Manhattan, be in a sprawling suburban campus with all kinds of food offerings, amenities, and a little bit more elbow space. Big fan of suburban office.
What's your thoughts with regard to the legislation 485X, the other things, and the conversions from office to residential?
Well, taking 485X, I think it's a poorly executed and a compromise between people who have demonized commerce and developers who actually need it. I don't think it's as good as the original program. We do know that people are using it. It beats the alternatives because you must have tax incentives to build. People, lay people and people not in the industry, and especially politicians, are so wildly uninformed and believe that all developers are getting extremely rich on every project. The truth of the matter is, without these programs, most projects residential products wouldn't be financially viable at all. And that's not just for the fat cat owners. That's for all of the trades, whether they're union or not. So I'm glad it's there, but I don't think it's the greatest. And with regards to the second piece of legislation, I'm sorry, we said 421A and the other one was?
X.
Right. Look, I think that these are poorly drafted pieces of legislation, but people will avail themselves of it because there's no financial viability without them.
Okay. You see private equity funding for more deals?
We do, but what's been interesting the past couple of years is your listeners will know, private equity generally delivers to its investors outsized returns, and those have historically been in the high teens or an equity multiple. So if I'm a pension fund investing with a private equity fund here in New York City and I give them $10 million, I'm expecting a return in the teens. What happened a couple of years ago when pricing got so tight and debt got so high, private equity realized gone are the days where they can buy a building and 3 to 5 years later make their returns in New York City. So private equity started to take travel outside of New York. Because many private equity firms have a mandate to be in New York City, and they specialize in New York City, they switched over to the credit side. So instead of buying a building as an owner, they would lend on a building in a short-term capacity at higher rates than banks. I think the credit side of private equity is quite content with a lot of the bets that it's made in New York City because they generally come in at a lower basis than the purchase price. And I think private equity has really come back to New York in earnest because of the pricing reset. Opportunity abounds, and private equity will be the first ones in.
Okay, last question with regard to nonprofits buying their own property or doing other things.
So last year, of the 20 years that I've done this in 1,038 closings, last year was a wild year. We sold 8 vacant buildings, including some for a public corporation, for the Walt Disney Corporation, some landmark buildings down on Bowery. Never in one calendar year had I sold more than 4 vacant buildings, because more often than not, the people who buy vacant buildings, when we're talking about commercial, are users. Not-for-profits have gotten really wise over the years. And I'm not talking about the biggest and, most well-endowed not-for-profits. I'm talking up and down the financial spectrum. They recognize that there are tax benefits to owning your own fee simple or condominium property. And they also recognize that they're paying so much in rent that the delta between what they can be paying to pay down the mortgage and actually come closer to fee simple ownership and rent, it makes better economic sense if they can pull it off to do it. The other factor is we talked about pricing coming down. I posit that you will see a lot more not-for-profits owning the spaces that they occupy. And this is good because they'll be there ad infinitum.
Great. So I'd say you are bullish on 2026.
I am, and I just want to put an asterisk next to that. I've been blessed of being a guest on your show many times over the years. I do not say that all the time. There have been years that I've walked into covering one of my eyes, kind of the way you look at a horror movie. We have an arrow up, and I hope we're coming out of the abyss. I think the only real X factor and bogey is to see what our elected officials do to harm commerce.
I'd like to thank my friend David Schechtman for being here.
Thank you, Michael.